Good morning, everyone. John 471 here to discuss the S&P 500. Today is Thursday, May 8th, 2025. Allow me to read our disclaimer. Derivatives trading is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. Let's begin today, as we always do, with our news. On the docket today, as I mentioned, it's Thursday, May 8th, 8:30 Eastern. We have jobless claims. We also have productivity and costs dropping at the same time. At 10 Eastern, where are we at? 10 Eastern, we also have wholesale inventories. At 10:30, we have the Nat Gas report and some Treasury announcements into the afternoon. We also have at 10 a.m. Eastern, we have President Trump on the calendar for a trade announcement press conference. This is one we're all going to want to be aware of at the 10 o'clock hour. Probably going to be our big news driver today. As I said, we also have initial jobless claims at 8:30, but the rhetoric that happens at 10 will be a big deal, so be attentive to that. Let's move on to our charts. Okay, here we are, S&P 500, daily bars, full session. Before we get into any discussion, I would like to invite you to like and subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying any of the content here or if you just enjoy convergent trading. We're trying to get to 10,000 subscribers. There's a lot of psychological resistance to that 10,000 figure. We'd like to invite you to help us bust through that resistance. Anyway, on to our charts. This chart, we're just continuing the narrative that we've seen, which was the potential to break the monthly one-time framing. We had recovered the March range, as I've been talking about. We took out the March VPOC, and now we're just kind of hanging out in this area. We see that this 5,600 is a pretty clear floor, at least so far. We've tapped on it a bunch of times. We've not been able to get any kind of a flush lower below it, and instead you see these few days that had pulled back. So far today, we're pushing higher out of them. This really brings into focus the targets we had up here, which are the developing monthly high, also the prior week's high, and the prior month's high RTH, which is the 39s, and then up here where I've already drawn the line, the 70s, the prior month's full session high. These are the targets that would be on deck if we're able to show some excursion out of here. And of course, the 5821s are the big one if we continue higher. The one thing that I'll continue to say, or that I'll add on this chart, with just how much has went on in this area, and in my opinion, how almost obvious the trade has become, what we have to watch is if we finally get that test of the high that everyone's looking for. If we get that test and if we just kind of fall back. I mean, what we want to see is we take the high and then it gives us a nice trade to the next target. But just because of how much that's went on in here and how many people are probably looking to sell that high, we also need to be attentive that we might just poke our heads out and just roll back over and keep just trading through these prices until they're completely done. But that's up to the market. Let's go on to the next chart here. Okay, we're just going to quickly take a look at our market profile chart. This is RTH only. Here is our prior week's high, which, in the prior chart, we've talked about the choppy grind higher that we've seen that was moving value higher. And then here on this day, we start to see value begin to move lower, which it did, moved lower again here. It began one time framing lower on the daily. And then yesterday, what we did, we took the one time framing, but we really didn't, we were unable to continue. What we actually did yesterday, we had tested both the high and the low with excesses on both, but really just reiterated value right in this area. We did move the VPOC down just a bit. Settlement moved up. But really overall these 2 days, to me, just kind of reiterated value right here. This is where everyone had to trade to decide what was going to happen next. And it looks like maybe we got what's happening next. Somewhat. As you can see, this line up here is where we're currently trading. We've pushed higher, and so now the question becomes, do we take this high? And if so, what happens when we take this high? This is the prior week's high, and here's the prior month's high. Here, up here, the 76s. So those are the targets I've been talking about. So the big question today is, do we get this high? Question one. Question two, if we do get this high, do we continue to the next targets? Or if we do not get this high, or if we do get this high, then do sellers emerge, and instead of going to the next targets, do we fall back into our area of accepted trade and potentially test the gap or test the prior day's high? So those are really the questions that we need to be aware of going into the trade today. Let's go to our intraday chart and plan for specific price action. Okay, here we are on our intraday chart. It's a PNF showing the full session. The lavender areas are the overnight trade. So what's important on this chart? Well, here's the area of structure right around the prior week's high, which is visible on this chart that I've been talking about as sort of our resistance that we put in. Sellers were here, we dropped from it, retested, continued to drop, and then weren't able to retest. We had this little area where the buyers were, or that I kind of said that I would expect buyers to be, and wouldn't you know it, seems to be true. That area is, emerged as support. Now we pushed higher and we're right here. So what can we gather from that? I had talked about this, the VPOC of this area as being pretty important. It's in confluence with the prior week's settle. You can see we're trading it right now. So for me, I will begin today by talking about bullish scenarios. However, anything could happen, and we'll zoom in just a bit to see this price action. We'll throw the stock zones up because they will, they're useful for describing this. Let's move the chart to the area that we want to look at. Okay, so bullish ideas first. We're pushing higher. Here's our overnight VPOC. For me, right out of the gates, let's see if I can get a color that would be a little better. How about a dark blue? Maybe. But there we go. So anyway, right out of the gates here, we're pushing. We see our overnight VPOC here. And I'll just tell you, we don't have to make it that much more complicated than this. If we hold above this overnight VPOC, then I'll expect, obviously, a take of the prior week's high. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Maybe we get some type of pullback into this area and it just continues. But if we hold this overnight VPOC, then we're looking for the overnight high and potentially the prior week's high. So that seems pretty obvious. What next? Well, here's the thing. If we, like I kind of had mentioned, if we can take this prior week's high and show acceptance rather than just fall back into range, if we can show acceptance, then I will be open to the next target, which is the 39s. I'm going to tell you that I would love to get on a great long that just explodes higher today. I would love to do that. I don't know if that'll happen. That seems like it might be too easy because this whole trade seems to be very obvious. So I will kind of be looking at it probably a bit more zone to zone. That is, if we can move up, if we can hold hold the overnight VPOC, we get the overnight high and we accept prior week's high, then I'm open to trade for the prior month's high. Continue to hold there, then I'm open to continuation higher to take this VPOC and get up into this next zone. The key target with continuation above the prior month's RTH high, which is 40s, the key target above with a scale at this zone would be this 76 region. Don't discount this 62 zone. There's potential, if I'm correct, and if there are a lot of people on this trade, don't be shocked if there's a lot of resistance here around the 62s ahead of the obvious target. If we're able to get above the 62s and get into our 76 key target, there's potential for stops to go off and for us to just continue and take out this unauctioned area, these singles, and continue right up to Century, which would be my extended target for today, which would be Century. So just continuing that, if we're able to move higher and take the overnight high, get our initial target of the prior week's high, that would put this prior month's high, these 40s on deck. If we can accept prices there, then I'm looking for tests of the 62 zone, not insignificant. But if we're able to get through that, then we're looking at the 76s and the unauctioned areas above. This is just kind of the trade that I've talked about for quite some time now. So we don't need to continue any further. What else could happen here? Well, here's the thing. We could get that test that we're looking for, the almost obvious test at this point of the prior week's high. But what could happen is everybody that bought down in here, everybody, all these prices, all of this activity could be just waiting to sell this and we take this high, get up around the prior month's high. Maybe we take it, maybe we don't. But the thing that we don't want to see if we're on a long is we don't want to see us poke our heads above the prior month's high or fail to get it and then just get shoved back into the prior week's range. We've seen this a lot when we hit areas that pretty much everybody wants to see us continue at, where we just kind of, it looks like nobody in the world is selling, then all of a sudden everybody in the world is selling and we just can't get that high anymore and we just start to grind lower. And we grind because this starts to look like a pullback. So there are smaller traders supporting this price, trying to sell this high, but they don't get it. But then we flushed like just a couple ticks lower, grind, and it looks like it's a pullback until it just starts to unwind. So basically what I'm saying here is if we take the prior week's high or get any type of push that just lets the pressure off, but then we get shoved back below the prior week's high, then that would be a caution flag for the bullish idea, and we may start to see some reversion lower. As I've said, the overnight VPOC is an area where I would expect support if the bulls are for real. But if we get action like that, where we test higher, get shoved back down, and all of a sudden we're pressing into the overnight VPOC, then that would be a signal for me that maybe we're going to try prices lower. If we're unable to get back above the prior week settle, prior week's high, then I would look for excursion lower. And the big target, if we drop the prior week's if we drop the overnight VPOC, this area, if we can't get there, the big target is the gap close, the 71 area to close the gap, session gap. On an initial test of gap close, there is always potential for support. And I think that it's likely to probably see at least some support here. There's, we easily could see a test, maybe a lick check at the prior range, and then all of a sudden, boom, we're back above the overnight VPOC, and the whole bullish idea could just be back on. That's very possible. Find the resistance here, get the pullback, and continue. That's one possibility. However, if we don't get that, if we see some support, it tries to go, we can't really go anywhere, and we fall back into range, then the next obvious target is, of course, this 50 zone. And if this 50 zone does not provide support, then we're just back where we were, and I would be open to excursion even further to this 20 zone. I'm not really necessarily expecting this today, but if we end up closing the gap and buyers are not there, then I would expect to see us just seep lower. But anyway, I would expect some support. Like I said, this 50 zone, if we lose it, then I'm open to this 20 zone. If we start to lose this zone, guys, I'm not expecting it, but if somehow today we lose this 20 zone and start making progress below this, that would be a big deal. Because what I'm saying here is all of this action that's happened, there's a possibility that all of this action that's happened here, this well-traded area, if everybody that bought here is looking to sell these highs, and if they don't get them, and then we somehow fall back below this same area, then all those same participants that wanted to sell up here might get really nervous and start to push prices lower in a way that kind of changed the environment. I'm not expecting it, but we should be ready for it. Anyway, what's our nothing day? Our nothing day would be any day that weekly takes out these highs but doesn't go anywhere and then falls back into range, maybe even closes the gap, but just kind of hangs out here and does similar to what we saw down here, but just does the whole thing up here. That would be outside in for me. Could be good trading if we have enough range, but it would be mostly outside in. And that would be something that we want to be aware of if we're trading that environment. So anyway, that's what I got for you. I think the big question to decide is, are we going to take these highs? And if so, are we going to continue? If we're not going to do that, are we going to revert lower, and are we going to close the gap? That's the big question for us to figure out as early as we can today. I'm going to wrap it up here, 15 minutes. Hopefully that's complete for you guys. I hope everyone's having a good morning. I hope your good morning continues. And most importantly, I hope that you find some way to improve your trading today that is not dependent upon your P&L or anything like that. Any questions, ask me in the chat room. Always happy to help. And if not, I'll see you tomorrow. Hope you're having a great day. Let's get out there and clock those ticks. Ciao.